Every once in a while, there's a little flurry of media activity around criminal investigations by tax authorities. Typically, it's about some successes they may have had in taking down some syndicate or the funding challenges they face. From an international perspective, these media articles almost always relate to the IRS in the US, the HMRC in the UK, or the ATO in Australia. In truth, there's very little comparative data on criminal investigations by tax administrations. So, a super quick note about me and why I find these conversations interesting. I love talking about criminal investigations in the tax space. Many moons ago, I was a prosecutor and I was the head of criminal investigations at the South African Revenue Service. So, it's a topic that sits close to my heart. Conversations around criminal investigations by tax administrations are so important. They're a critical part of a balanced compliance risk management program. The truth is that some taxpayers will only respond to criminal action. They need a credible threat of detection, and they need the consequences to be sufficiently severe that it actually influences their behavior. Today, there really is only one comparative dataset that touches on criminal investigations by tax administrations globally. So there are a few fields that are captured in the International Survey of Revenue Administrations, so the ISORA dataset. And to a lesser degree, there's one page looking at criminal investigations in the OECDs comparative series. There are very real challenges in respect of the data that is available. It's simply too old and too little. Countries seem to be capturing it inconsistently for us to really be able to use the data in a way that serves a real purpose. So let's have a look at some examples. The first data point relates to the role that tax administrations play in criminal investigations. You'll notice that ISORA tracks three possibilities. An administration could conduct investigations itself. It could conduct investigations under the direction of another agency, or a third scenario where all investigations are conducted by another agency. This data at least lets us track some of the trends in respect of who leads the investigations. The problem is that there are a multitude of issues not covered in this high-level overview. A key weakness is the fact that ISORA does not track the numbers in respect of investigations done by other agencies. This often becomes a black hole where tax administrations have a perception that they have no control over these cases, that it's not their problem, and where the outcomes and the impact of these cases is simply not tracked. There are far too few conversations around how to make this model, where another agency does investigations on behalf of the tax administration, work. A second example of data that is being tracked, but ineffectively so, relates to the percentage of staff that are actually allocated to criminal investigations. So ISORA tracks a combined figure for audit and investigations, which actually doesn't help us very much. Why are we lumping audit and investigations together? They're very different functions with very different drivers and with very different objectives. To the extent that this combined audit and investigations number is useful, it does raise some interesting questions. So, for instance, what are the considerations that influence the ratio of staff assigned to audit and investigations functions? What role does the compliance climate or the tax gap play in developing an optimal rate of audit and investigation staff? Is it possible to secure compliance outcomes if very few staff members are assigned to audit and investigations? Where should this ratio land? It's really difficult to assess because there's so little comparative data. The third area where there is a bit of comparative data to play with is in the number of investigations that are referred for prosecution. So just in absolute terms, you can see that there's a huge disparity in the number of cases reportedly referred to prosecutors. Even accounting for differences in the size of the tax base, how does one rationalize Australia referring on average 48 cases a year, while Poland refers on average 14,500 cases a year? Just looking at the numbers, are all of these supposed investigations actually created equal? For instance, do some of the numbers maybe equate large-scale fraud investigations with simple late filing cases? And importantly, what about data on cases not handled by the tax administration? If you think back to the first data point that we looked at. Insofar as the data is useful, it also raises another question. Is there an optimal number of investigations and referrals a country should be doing? Can a country like Poland really send a reported 15,000 cases for prosecution and actually be effective? Or is this low and slow approach by the ATO a more reasonable approach to criminal investigations? What do these numbers tell us about case selection criteria or risk rules in these administrations? Again, we don't have enough comparative data to have a balanced, informed view. But more than that, we need to know far more than just the number of cases sent on to prosecutors' offices. We need to know in what percentage of cases prosecutors decline to prosecute. In what percentage of cases do prosecutors send the case back for further investigation? What are the turnaround times on the cases that are being sent for prosecution? In what percentage of cases do the accused plead guilty? What are the kind of conviction rates that we are looking at? Tax administrations far too easily get away with a flawed argument that these issues are beyond their control. They are not, and they should be tracked. So if anyone working on the ISORA dataset or some other comparative datasets is watching, here is what we need to have more substantive conversations. We need to separate out audit and investigations staffing numbers. In the numbers, we need to differentiate between complex fraud investigations and simple administrative offences like late filing. We need to track the outcomes of investigations by both administrations and by other agencies so that we can compare the outcomes and see which approach actually works the best. We need to track investigations performance in far more detail. We need to know in what percentage of cases prosecutors refuse to prosecute. We need to know in what percentage of cases we get convictions. So if we look at what's available at the moment, it's all useful, but we really want to start having the kind of substantive conversations we need to be having about criminal investigations in the tax administration space. We need far better data. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what data would be useful and what other really good sources of information there are out there.